1715, Amsterdam. City officials have been ordered to hang the largest painting in their new town hall between two doors, and the canvas is far too large for the space. So they do something almost impossible to imagine today. They take a blade to one of the largest canvases in the Dutch Republic, and they start cutting. They slice away 64.4 centimeters from the left side, 23.3 from the top, 11.3 from the bottom, 7 from the right. Two full-grown militiamen disappear from the composition completely. A small child standing farther back on a bridge disappears with them. No surviving record explains what happened to any of the removed canvas afterward. Nobody, it seems, thought it mattered enough to keep. This is the painting the way it exists right now, hanging in the Rijksmuseum in Amsterdam. And this is what is no longer there. At first glance, the subject is simple. Overwhelming, yes, it is enormous, almost 4 meters tall, but simple in what it shows. Two officers stride toward the viewer out of a crowd of armed men. Captain Cocq, dressed in black and slashed by a blood-red sash, walks beside his lieutenant, Willem van Ruitenburg, who seems to glow in pale gold. Pikes point in every direction, a drummer beats, a flag rises. It looks unmistakably like a militia company marching out at night. Except it is not night. The darkness is not the subject of this painting. It is part of what happened to it afterward. For roughly 200 years, everyone read this as a night scene, a dark, moody canvas, guards stepping into shadow. The name stuck so completely that it is easy to forget something stranger. Rembrandt did not call this painting The Night Watch. In fact, it had no original title at all. The long, descriptive title used by museums today came later, and the nickname itself was first written down only in 1797, more than a century after the paint had dried. What actually darkened the scene was not Rembrandt's brush. It was time. Varnish yellowed, soot from decades of fireplace smoke settled into the surface, and the lead-based pigments themselves grew darker with age. Only after a major cleaning in the 1940s did conservators uncover what had been hiding under all that grime. Full sunlight, not moonlight, falling from the upper left. Here is a detail worth pausing on before we go further. Trace the shadow cast by Captain Cocq's raised left hand, and inside the outline made by his thumb and forefinger sits a tiny embroidered lion, stamped onto the lieutenant's jacket by nothing but the fall of light. It is the lion from the Amsterdam coat of arms. That is not an accident. That is a city claiming ownership of the men who defend it, using shadow as a signature. Nothing about this approach was standard for the genre. Other painters working on similar militia commissions in the same years, men like Nicolaas Elias Pickenoy or Bartholomeus van der Helst, arranged their subjects in even rows under flat, even light, so that every man who had paid his share received an equally clear likeness. Rembrandt broke that unspoken contract. He buried some of his own paying clients in shadow, let other figures block their faces entirely, and replaced a lineup with a moment. It was a commercial risk dressed up as an artistic one, and it is part of why this canvas still reads as an event rather than a roster. But every detail we have examined so far belongs to a composition that no longer exists in full. Because in 1642, when this canvas left Rembrandt's workshop, the captain and the lieutenant were not standing where they stand today. They were pushed toward the right side of the scene, marching into a wide, open stretch of canvas on the left. That space held two more militiamen, a small child farther back on a bridge, and a stone balustrade. It was not empty filler. It was the reason the two officers appeared to be walking somewhere rather than simply posing. In 1715, that open space became the reason for the cut. A knife went into it and removed it entirely, along with the two men who had paid to stand there and the child on the bridge. No trace of the pieces has ever surfaced, not in an attic, not at auction, not anywhere. They may have been discarded. They may still survive somewhere, unidentified. The absence of any record leaves both possibilities open, though the more likely fate, 3 centuries on, is that they were simply thrown out and now lie somewhere beneath a city that has rebuilt itself many times since. In 2021, using a small surviving copy of the original composition, now attributed to the painter Garrett London's, the museum's own research project built a digital reconstruction of what that missing left edge actually looked like. Once you see it, the whole painting rearranges itself in your head. Cocq and Ruytenberch are no longer standing in the geometric center of a tidy rectangle. They are off to one side, marching into real, open space, exactly as Rembrandt intended, a company in motion rather than a company on display. What the officials in 1715 did was not trimming. It dragged the officers into the center of the canvas and, in the process, tamed one of the most dynamic compositions of the entire Dutch Golden Age. Now that the missing space is back, at least on a screen, it is worth asking what survived inside the part of the canvas we still have. Off to the left, glowing with a light source that does not appear to exist anywhere else in the scene, stands a small girl in a golden yellow dress. She is not a soldier. She is barely the height of a child, yet her face belongs to a grown woman. Then one figure breaks every rule the rest of the composition obeys. And this is that figure. Historians still do not agree on what she is meant to represent. A living mascot for the militia guild, a symbolic figure of victory, or something more personal. A dead chicken hangs from her belt, its claws deliberately prominent, echoing the Dutch word for the militia's own name, the Cloveniers. A pistol sits half hidden behind it, doubling the same pun. Oak leaves decorate a nearby helmet, a period symbol of victory. This is clever visual wordplay, the kind Dutch guild painters used constantly. Her face is a separate question. The resemblance has led some writers to connect her with Rembrandt's wife, Saskia, resembling earlier images of her, although the identification cannot be proven. If Rembrandt intended that resemblance, the timing makes it almost unbearable. He received this commission around 1639, at the peak of his fame, and used the money and his reputation to buy an enormous house he genuinely could not afford, a decision that would eventually ruin him financially years later. At the very same time, Saskia, the woman who had brought him both love and a fortune, was dying slowly of tuberculosis. In 1641, she gave birth to their only surviving child, a son named Titus, and never recovered. By the time this painting was finished, in 1642, she was gone. If the resemblance is real, that is grief, smuggled into the loudest, most aggressive, most masculine scene he ever painted. For a long time, a separate story circulated about this painting, that the militiamen hated it, that their faces were buried in shadow, their egos wounded, so they refused to pay, and Rembrandt's career collapsed under the weight of their anger. Whatever complaints may have existed, the surviving evidence does not describe a rejected painting. The 18 men who commissioned this work paid the agreed 1,600 guilders in full. Captain Cocq liked the result enough to commission a watercolor copy for his own family album, and to order the separate oil copy, now attributed to Garrett London's, that later preserved the missing composition. A contemporary art theorist, a former student of Rembrandt's named Samuel van Hoogstraten, wrote that this canvas made every other militia portrait in the room look flat, like playing cards beside it. The weapons on this canvas were real, but by 1642, the performance mattered almost as much as the fighting. The Dutch Republic was approaching the end of its 80-year struggle against Spain, a war that would only officially end 6 years later. Amsterdam had become one of the richest trading cities in Europe, and its civic militias, once real fighting units, were quietly becoming something closer to exclusive social clubs for wealthy merchants who would probably never fire a shot in anger. Rembrandt seems to have understood exactly what he was painting. Not a real deployment, but a performance of readiness, staged by men whose actual danger had mostly passed. That context adds weight to a detail the conventional interpretation tends to pass over quickly. The safest reading of this painting is civic pride, a triumph of Dutch craftsmanship and city identity. One art historian, Robin O'Brien, has argued for something less comfortable. She points to that dead rooster on the girl's belt again, and notes that Captain Cocq's own surname sounds almost exactly like the French word for rooster. A dead, spurless bird sits directly behind the captain who shares its name, while the long tail of his red command sash dangles between his legs in a shape that, in the language of the 17th century, could read as a jester's cap, a mark of mockery rather than command. The proposed chain of puns is too specific to dismiss casually, but specificity is not proof of intention. I suspect Rembrandt enjoyed the ambiguity, whether or not every element was meant as a private insult to the men who paid him. The lieutenant's coat holds a different kind of secret, one that required chemistry rather than iconography to uncover. To create its molten, golden glow, Rembrandt used an unusual mixture of arsenic sulfide pigments. One of them appears to have acquired its orange-red color through heating before it ever reached his palate, and he combined it with lead tin yellow and vermilion to imitate the shifting color of gold thread. Researchers had never before identified this particular mixture anywhere in Rembrandt's surviving work, though a similar combination later turned up in a painting by a different Amsterdam contemporary, made about 15 years afterward, so the choice was rare rather than unique to him. The paint itself sits almost a millimeter thick in places, built up in a technique his student called kinlijkheid, a Dutch word that roughly means tangibility. Stand close to the real canvas, under raking light, and those ridges of paint throw actual physical shadows onto the surface. So the embroidery seems to lift itself off the coat and into the viewer's own space. No photograph can show you that. Only the original, seen at an angle, gives up this particular secret. Modern imaging revealed a second, abandoned composition sitting beneath the visible one. This was not a single burst of instinct, finished in one uninterrupted push. It was a painting revised again and again, over a period whose exact length still cannot be pinned down with certainty. The first changes were structural. Rembrandt removed a forest of extra pikes that had made the upper half of the crowd too noisy to read. Then came smaller, more individual corrections. A flamboyant feather plume disappeared from one musketeer's helmet. A sword sketched in between the two officers was abandoned before the final paint layer. Even the dog in the lower corner was reconsidered, down to the angle of one front leg, brought closer to a print Rembrandt is known to have owned and copied from. The apparent spontaneity of the finished scene was constructed through repeated correction, not achieved in a single confident gesture. The painting has also drawn direct physical attacks, though each one reached a different layer of the surface. In 1911, an unemployed former ship's cook attacked it with a shoe knife, protesting his inability to find work. The knife stopped in the thick, old varnish, and the canvas beneath held. In 1975, a man suffering from schizophrenia carried a serrated bread knife into the museum, pushed past a guard, and cut 12 deep zigzag gashes through paint and canvas near the captain's legs. Questioned afterward, he said he had been ordered to do it by God. Months later, he took his own life in a psychiatric hospital. In 1990, a man recently escaped from psychiatric care sprayed concentrated acid across a figure dressed in red, and the acid again reached only the varnish before a guard flooded the surface with water fast enough to save the paint underneath. 3 attacks, each driven by a different crisis, grievance, or delusion, and in every case the damage stayed at the level of varnish or canvas, because paint and canvas can be repaired. What the officials cut away in 1715 cannot be. The knife attacks that look most dramatic did the least permanent harm. The paperwork decision that looked most boring did the most permanent damage of all. One further detail belongs to that same story of quiet alteration. The elegant golden shield in the upper right corner of the canvas, listing the names of the 18 men who paid for this painting, is not Rembrandt's work at all. It was added decades later by a different, unknown hand, painted directly onto a canvas its original creator never touched. Even the official record of who paid for this painting sits on top of what Rembrandt actually made. The cutting in 1715 was only the first move in a long history of relocation. In 1808, when Napoleon's forces had turned the town hall into a royal palace, the canvas was carried to a different building entirely, an Academy of Sciences, where it hung as a curiosity of national history rather than a civic commission. It was not until 1885, when Amsterdam built an entirely new museum around it, that the painting stopped being moved to fit available walls, and a wall was finally built to fit the painting. For 170 years, in other words, this canvas had been treated less like a fixed masterpiece and more like a large, valuable object that simply needed to be housed somewhere convenient. What survives today is treated very differently from how it was treated then. During the Second World War, this canvas was unscrewed from its frame, rolled around a giant cylinder that had to be turned daily so the paint would not crack, and hidden first in coastal bunkers, then deep inside limestone caves cut into a hillside near Maastricht, until the war ended and it came home whole. Today it stands inside a purpose-built glass chamber in the middle of a crowded gallery, watched by scanners and chemists in full view of the public, with an evacuation slit hidden in the floor in front of it, through which the entire painting can be lowered to safety in an emergency. What an earlier generation of the same city, once treated as something that could be altered to fit a room, now has a room built entirely around it, along with a research program and a rescue system of its own. Somewhere, an attic nobody has searched, or, more likely, deep in the ground beneath a city that has rebuilt itself many times since, there may still be a fragment of Rembrandt's own hand. 2 men, a child on a bridge, a stone railing someone's fingers once gripped. We will probably never know whether any of it survived, or whether it dissolved into the earth generations ago, indistinguishable now from anything else the city once decided it could do without. A single administrative decision removed 2 human beings from the most famous painting in the Netherlands, and no one recorded where they went. The most unsettling part of this story is not that the painting was attacked 3 times by people in crisis. It is that its greatest and most permanent loss required no attacker at all, only a doorway that was slightly too narrow, and officials who saw a masterpiece as nothing more than the space available on a wall.